Hello, everyone. On behalf of the lecture committee, we would like to welcome you all to this year's Literary Legends Lecture. Today's event is in collaboration with the University of Iowa Center for Advancement, as well as Hancher Auditorium's Infinite Dream Festival. Be sure to check out Hancher Auditorium's website to find other events in this series. We would also like to thank some of our other collaborators, including the U Iowa Vice President for Research Creative Matters Series, the Iowa Writers Workshop, and the Nonfiction Writing Program. I would like to introduce our speaker for the night. Currently the director of the undergraduate English and creative writing major here at the University of Iowa, Kaveh Akbar is also an accomplished poet, novelist, and editor. Becoming a New York Times bestseller and National Book Award finalist following the success of his novel Martyr, he has gracefully captured and shared the Iranian-American experience while also touching on topics such as mental health and substance abuse. That all being said, I am very pleased to welcome Kaveh Akbar and Daniel Khalastchi to the stage.
Hello! Can you guys hear us okay? People. You guys up there, you guys okay? Yes. Was that a picture? Are we trying to send me a message? That looked like there was a word written on there or something.
No, I was taking a picture too.
Oh, okay. I could see your screen. I didn't know if you were trying to relay some important data to me. Okay, welcome. Thank you all for coming. We're really excited to be here and to be in conversation. I really appreciate everybody joining us tonight for this Literary Legends event. Before we get started, I also just want to thank University of Iowa Center for Advancement, Performing Arts in Iowa, Hancher Auditorium, the Infinite Dream Festival, University of Iowa President for Research Creative Matters Series, the Iowa Writers Workshop, and the Nonfiction Writing Program for their support of this talk. Yeah, round of applause. So, as you may have heard a moment ago, my name is Daniel Khalastchi, and I am the Executive Director of the Office of Writing and Communication here at the University of Iowa. And as you also heard a moment ago, our guest tonight, our literary legend, Kaveh Akbar, is no stranger to the world of words, their power, their responsibility, their joy, and their worth. In fact, Akbar is the opposite of a stranger to the various literary landscapes many of us as writers and readers have come to believe don't always allow for easy passage between. What I mean to say is that as a writer, educator, editor, and goodwill ambassador to the intrinsic muscle of story and song, of stanza and paragraph, of rhyme and structure and character and plot, and the emotional work of exploring our pasts and the pasts of our maybe always present personal and familial and evolving cultural records, Akbar is a natural citizen of the page in every sense. Here is a writer who moves not just between genres and forms, but also a writer who remains open to influence and inspiration, a writer who keeps his ear to the ground, his eyes open to the wonder of others, that generative global constituency, who champions their work and the great truth that the pursuit of artistic expression is as valuable as it gets. In his poetry and prose, Akbar writes with such beauty, such arresting assessment of the human experience, it acts as a map for us to follow. Here, it says, is another way to see it. Here, it says again, is what just might be possible if we only try. No, really, read the books and anthologies, Pilgrim Bell and Martyr, Calling a Wolf, and Another Last Call. Read them and you'll see a literary citizen leading the way with a well-lit flashlight and suitcase full of risk, fearlessness, imagination, and heart. In the here and now, we are lucky to have this visionary in our city of literature, calling Iowa and our university his home. Legend is a big word, reserved for those who deserve it. Kaveh Akbar is a legend. And we couldn't be prouder of his accomplishments, and we are thrilled to have him with us tonight for this discussion. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Kaveh Akbar. Kaveh, how's life?
Right now, the second after that. I have a friend who, when something very, very nice happens to one of us, she always says, well, that certainly doesn't disprove that we're in a simulation. And I feel like sitting here in front of all of these beautiful people with you and hearing you read something like that is so felt and earnest and clearly about someone else. I just have that feeling of this certainly doesn't disprove that I'm in a simulation. But I don't know. If I'm in a coma, it's a happy one, I guess.
Well, speaking of reading, the hope for tonight is Kaveh and I are going to have a conversation. We are going to be interested in taking some questions from the audience. So some of you may have found some note cards. So you're welcome to write some questions down. In a few minutes, we'll collect them and we'll bring them up here and sort through them and kind of read as many as we can get to. But before we get to our conversation, let's start by putting some words in the world. Does that sound all right? Kaveh, you want to read a little bit?
Yeah. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Kaveh Akbar. It's wonderful to meet you. This is Daniel Khalastchi. Thank you so much for being here with us. Pinch hitting at the last moment. Can we give a round of applause for Danny, please? I admire the work that you do on and off the page so much, the work that you do in this community, the work that you do for writers. Originally billed was Eve Ewing, who's a dear pal, and she had some childcare stuff. But I also wanted to shout her out. She's one of the smartest people that I've ever met on the planet Earth, sincerely. She has a Harvard PhD in sociology, but also writes Black Panther for Marvel. She's better at her hobbies than I am at my vocations. It's really obnoxious. And so just beaming some good love out there to Eve Ewing as well. If you guys want to pick up some Eve Ewing books in the near future, I promise you won't regret it. I'm just going to read. So I'm sort of a funny, not funny, it's like in Goodfellas, funny haha. I'm funny the way that crows are funny birds, a writer, in that as Danny alluded to, I write in every genre, I guess, or I also like to edit. I like to read a lot. And so I thought I'd start with a poem written by a not me person, which are most of the poems in the world. In this poem, I see a former student, Neil, here, who took a class with me where we learned a lot about this poem. So I could ask Neil to come up and I'm not going to do that to you. But I put together this anthology called The Penguin Book of Spiritual Verse a few years ago. And the project of the book is to go from the earliest attributable author of our species all the way through the 20th century, tracking the human project of spiritual writing from ancient Mesopotamia and Sumeria through the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas to Homer and the Greeks to Li Po to Aboriginal Antipodean oral traditions to sub-Saharan African traditions to indigenous Mesoamerican traditions, et cetera, all the way into sort of contemporary global poetry, right? A modest project. But I really enjoy it, and I like, so what I'm gonna read to you is a poem by a woman named Enheduanna, who is the oldest nameable author in human history. In other words, these poems, which she wrote to the goddess Inanna, who is also the presiding goddess of Gilgamesh. If those of you who have read or heard of Gilgamesh, it's also the sort of goddess who presides over those characters. Enheduanna was a Sumerian priestess who wrote in 2300 BCE. She was at some point in her life exiled and writes lots of her poetry from exile, like Ovid. What I find really moving is how much she talks and thinks the same as I do, across unimaginable gulfs in culture and place and time, right? Like her life would have been incomprehendibly different than my own, and yet when I read her, I feel someone anxious and scared and angry about the same things that I'm anxious and scared and angry about. So anyways, this is a translation from Jane Hirshfield, the very, very wonderful poet Jane Hirshfield did this translation, but this poem is not a me poem. This is a 43 century old poem to the goddess Inanna, written from a place of exile, so she's pissed off about it, by Enheduanna. Lady of all powers, in whom light appears, radiant one, beloved of heaven and earth, tiara crown, priestess of the highest God, my lady, you are the guardian of all greatness. Your hand holds the 7 powers. You lift the powers of being. You have hung them over your fingers. You have gathered the many powers. You have clasped them now, like necklaces onto your breast. Like a dragon, you poisoned the land. When you roared at the earth, in your thunder, nothing green could live. A flood fell from the mountain. You, Inanna, foremost in heaven and earth, lady riding a beast, you rained fire on the heads of men, taking your power from the highest, following the commands of the highest. Lady of all the great rights, who can understand all that is yours? In the forefront of the battle, all is struck down by you. Oh, winged lady, like a bird you scavenge the land, like a charging storm you charge, like a roaring storm you roar, you thunder in thunder, snort in rampaging winds. Your feet are continually restless, carrying your harp of sighs. You breathe out the music of morning. It was in your service that I first entered the holy temple. I, Enheduanna, the highest priestess. I carried the ritual basket. I chanted your praise. Now I have been cast out to the place of lepers. Day comes and the brightness is hidden around me. Shadows cover the light. Drape it in sandstorms. My beautiful mouth knows only confusion. Even my sex is dust. Do you feel how the energy in the room, the air in the room right now, this second, feels palpably different than it did 2 minutes ago? Like the air, like the physical air in the room feels different on your skin, like on your cheeks. Yes. That's because a woman 43 centuries ago wrote a poem. That's fucking magic. Like, no, for real, like I've never been the beneficiary of a burning bush or an angel's clarion trumpet or, but this is the magic that I have known, right? A woman from an incomprehensibly different time and place in the world wrote a poem, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to strap it to a gurney and beat some meaning out of it, right? Like, you feel the way that the air feels different, right? The chemical composition of the gas around us has changed, right? That is magic, right? I can get so high off that. I find that poem so remarkable because she's pissed off, right? I really, really respond to her anger, right? My beautiful mouth knows only confusion. Even my sex is dust. I've been cast out to the place of lepers, right? And in a moment so governed by occasions for real rage, and not idiot rage, but rage that arises out of a surfeit of compassion, rage that emerges from an ability to perceive the humanity in those being harmed, right? The ability to look at harm and say, that's a human being with an interiority as vital and complex as my own, right? I think rage can be an appropriate response, right? I don't think it's some moral defect to be buffed out with sufficient training of the spirit, right? And in this time where I was feeling so much of this rage, I looked to Enheduanna, and this woman, again, like 43 centuries ago, was teaching me. I think that, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I have like 57 degrees in poetry, and I don't even know what to say about it, right? Like, okay. Anyways, that's Enheduanna, the Jane Hirschfield translation. I'm gonna read just like the opening couple pages of this book, Martyr, which is a novel that I wrote. Sorry. That's a round of applause for Aaron, who moved his hands behind the curtain. I forgot I was supposed to be using that. But you can all hear me. Yeah, it's very kind. Yeah. Aaron's saying it's fine. I'm just going to read the opening pages of this novel that I wrote now. This is me, not a 43-century-old Sumerian priestess. These are truly just the opening pages. You don't need to know anything. Just writ large, but also acutely. Maybe it was that Cyrus had done the wrong drugs in the right order, or the right drugs in the wrong order. But when God finally spoke back to him after 27 years of silence, what Cyrus wanted more than anything else was a do-over, clarification. Lying on his mattress that smelled like piss and Febreze, in his bedroom that smelled like piss and Febreze, Cyrus stared up at the room's single light bulb, willing it to blink again, willing God to confirm that the bulb's flicker had been a divine action and not just the old apartment's trashy wiring. Flash it on and off, Cyrus had been thinking, not for the first time in his life. Just a little wink and I'll sell all my shit and buy a camel. I'll start over. All his shit at that moment amounted to a pile of soiled laundry and a stack of books borrowed from various libraries and never returned. Poetry and biographies, To the Lighthouse, My Uncle Napoleon. Never mind all that, though. Cyrus meant it. Why should the Prophet Muhammad get a whole visit from an archangel? Why should Saul get to see the literal light of heaven on the road to Damascus? Of course, it would be easy to establish bedrock faith after such clear-cut revelation. How is it fair to celebrate those guys for faith that wasn't faith at all, that was just obedience to what they plainly observed to be true? And what sense did it make to punish the rest of humanity who had never been privy to such explicit revelation? To make everyone else lurch from crisis to crisis? But then it happened for Cyrus too, right there in that ratty Indiana bedroom. He asked God to reveal himself, herself, themself, itself, whatever. He asked with all the earnestness at his disposal, which was troves. If every relationship was a series of advances and retreats, Cyrus was almost never the retreater, sharing everything important about himself at a word, a smile, with a shrug as if to say, those are just facts. Why should I be ashamed? He'd lain there on the bare mattress on the hardwood floor, letting his cigarette ash on his bare stomach like some sulky prince, thinking, turn the lights on and off, Lord, and I'll buy a donkey. I promise I'll buy a camel and ride him to Medina, to Gethsemane, wherever. Just flash the lights and I'll figure it out. I promise. He was thinking this, and then something happened. The light bulb flickered, or maybe it got brighter, like a camera's flash going off across the street, just a fraction of a second like that. And then it was back to normal, just a regular yellow bulb. Cyrus tried to recount the drugs he'd done that day. The standard bouquet of booze, weed, cigarettes, Klonopin, Adderall, Neurontin variously throughout the day. He had a couple Percocets left, but he'd been saving them for later that evening. None of what he'd taken was exotic, nothing that would make him out and out hallucinate. He felt pretty sober, in fact, relative to his baseline. He wondered if it had maybe been the sheer weight of his wanting or his watching that strained his eyes till they saw what they'd wanted to see. He wondered if maybe that was how God worked now in the new world. Tired of interventionist pyrotechnics like burning bushes and locust plagues, maybe God now worked through the tired eyes of drunk Iranians in the American Midwest, through CVS handles of bourbon and little pink pills with G31 written on their side. Cyrus took a pull from the giant plastic Old Crow bottle. The whiskey did, for him, what a bedside table did for normal people. It was always at the head of his mattress, holding what was essential to him in place. It lifted him daily from the same sleep it eventually set him into. Lying there, reflecting on the possible miracle he'd just experienced, Cyrus asked God to do it again. Confirmation, like typing your password in twice to a web browser. Surely if the all-knowing creator of the universe had wanted to reveal themselves to Cyrus, there'd be no ambiguity. Cyrus stared at the ceiling light, which in the fog of his cigarette smoke looked like a watery moon, and waited for it to happen again. But it didn't. Whatever sliver of a flicker he had or hadn't perceived didn't come back. And so, lying there in the stuffy haze of relative sobriety, itself a kind of high, amidst the underwear and cans and dried piss and empty orange pill bottles and half-read books held open against the hardwood, breaking their spines to face away, Cyrus had a decision to make.
I know we talked a little bit a couple weeks ago, and one thing that we discussed was maybe not spending too much time on the novel, talking about the novel. I just want to say real quick, the novel is so good. And one thing that's really beautiful to hear as you're reading it is how poetic the prose is, your attention to sound and to music and to rhyme. And as someone who first came to your work through poetry, recognizing that felt really interesting and engaging to me. And I want to use that as a way of going all the way back.
Cool.
How did you start writing? Where did the connection and passion and interest in words, the music of words, the power of words come to you? Were you a young child who was always reading and writing, or did that come later?
Yeah, that's a generous question. Thank you for it. And thank you all for being here, by the way. I didn't say that, but sincerely, it's a Friday evening. There's a football game imminent. The opportunity cost of spending time doing this has never been greater in the history of our species. You could be watching any movie ever on whatever streaming service. You could be learning to julienne and onion on YouTube or Tango or whatever. And you elected to be here with letters and community. And so sincerely, thank you for it. It's not lost on me that you're giving me some of your most irreplenishable resource, your time. And thank you. English is my second language. I came to America when I was a small child. And so when I was very, very little and just forming sentences, forming thoughts, I was aware that there was choice and there was selection to be made, right? Like I could say, give me water, or I could say, give me ab, right? I could say book, or I could say kitab, right? And at every turn, there was a choice, right? And I think that centered language as a medium, it centered it as material, or like really, really early on, right? That the sound book isn't affixed to this object, right? That there is actual decision to be made, right? And that one can play with that, right? One can sort of have fun with that. My mom, when we came to America, would also get these SAT prep books from the library and teach herself all of the vocabulary words in the back and then just pepper them into her idiom when she was talking to us with the hopes that we would just sort of like osmotically absorb it. And so I was also the kindergartner who would be like, I'm ambivalent about whether I take a nap or not, truly I didn't know what were the fancy words and what weren't the fancy words, right? Until I realized that people started to think that I was showing off. But I just literally didn't know what the fancy words were. And so I started realizing that if I talked the way that they talked on TV, no one would think that I was trying to sound smart. And the words that you only read in books and didn't ever hear on TV, those are the words that you weren't supposed to say out loud, right? And so I sort of modulated that over the years to variable efficacy. I will also say that really early on, so we spoke Farsi, we then spoke English in the house, and then we also prayed in Arabic. Right? And Arabic was not a language that either of my parents actually spoke, but we could all pray in it, right? And so it was this weird sort of mystical third, I think Catholics maybe have this if you attend a Latin Mass too, where it was like this sort of weird mystical third language that was just reserved for God, right? And so I knew that if I went through the stations of prayer and, and said these sounds earnestly, these mellifluous, delicious sounds, and spoke them earnestly, that somehow I was thinning the partition between me and a divine, right? And that has always been more or less how I continue to think about writing, right? Like I don't need to have a denotative understanding of what the words literally mean in every, I can listen to Ave Maria and weep without speaking a word of the language, right? I can listen to Future or Kendrick or whatever and feel hyped to work out or to run or what, like there is emotional data carried in sound, right? And so again, that was centered for me really early on. And then, like I think a lot of writers, I had a seminal high school English teacher who handed me a stack of poetry books one day. Actually, he read a poem called Facing It by Yusuf Komunyakaa. You probably know the poem. But I was just, and it's, about a middle-aged black man reflecting on his Vietnam service, right? So I was the 16-year-old kid in high school in Warsaw, Indiana. So like, not ostensibly, superficially, there wasn't a lot of like, identity symmetry or whatever, but I remember hearing that poem in the air, and I'm getting goosebumps talking about it right now. And it was just, I was like, that's an option, right? Like we can do that. Like, and then I took that book home, and I remember it was Neon Vernacular, an early selected of his, and I remember taking it home, and it was like the clouds parted and the angels came through and were like, "Purr, purr, 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 you're a poet," you know what I mean? And like I've never really deviated from that clarity. I mean, I certainly got distracted. I mean, my misspent youth is well documented at this point, but I never thought of myself as anything but a poet from that point on.
So at this point, you're in Indiana, and this English teacher, which is something a lot of us hear,
Yeah,
right?
mine was named Mr. Hen, Steve Hen. Shout out Mr. Hen.
And so he gives you this Komunyakaa book. You go home. Is that the point where you start writing? Were you writing before that?
Yeah, no, I was writing, but because I learned to speak English as I learned the orthography for English, the way that you sort of learn, like if you learned, I don't know, if someone who doesn't speak Arabic today, if an English speaker who didn't speak Arabic today started learning Arabic, they would learn the orthography concurrently with learning the vocabulary, right? And that's how I was learning English. So I learned to write English as I learned to speak it. And so my mom has, stories that I would illustrate and write in English from like as I was learning to speak, right? So it was those are very concurrent. So I was always sort of writing. This was when I realized that, because then I stepped into the 811.5 section of the library and I saw that there were all these spines that said poetry on them, right? And I realized that was a thing you could be. Like you could just, and I assumed that meant that I would spend my life, living in tuberculine squalor on top of a coal mine, right? But I was down for it, if that meant that I could do what Yusuf Komunyakaa was doing and what Sharon Olds was doing and Robert Bly was doing and Alberto Rios and Dorian Locke, these Naomi Shihab Nye, these poets who were so titanic for me early on, I was down for it,
And so you're at the library, you're checking out books. Is there a moment where you say to yourself, this is what I want to do for life? Or
it was literally when I took that first Yusuf Komunyakaa, it was almost offensive to me that people had been wasting my time with math or geography. You know what I mean? Like if this was an option, this is so obviously what I was. You know what I mean? Like that. But how did everyone not tell me that this was that this was there for me, you know.
And how was
I was actually a closet math nerd, by the way. I was like a stereotypical Middle Eastern, like I was on all the academic Super Bowl teams and stuff like that, and I was like actually really good at math. But discovering poetry, I was like, I'm obviously this, right?
Yeah, but math wasn't poetry.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other thing. But yeah, I could actually talk a lot about how my early interest in math still comes up a lot. But that's a whole other.
Well, so
Talk to me after this, and I'll give you that spiel.
at that point, are you then saying to family, friends, are you like, I'm gonna be a poet?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, everyone was like, you know.
Right.
And I got my first degree in. Cover your ears, administrators. But I like cheated and manipulated my way through my undergrad. Again, I had a very, very rapscallion, misspent youth. It's well documented. But my first degree was in English education, and I thought I would be like Mr. Hen. I thought I would be an English teacher and then sort of write poetry on the side, and that was how I would, you know. And I really, really love teaching. I mean, I still really, really love teaching. And I figured that would be my path, right? I would teach, you know, middle school or high school, and I would write poetry on the side, and that would be a really, really joyful life. And it would have been, you know.
Did your family, I'm thinking about my family that also is not all from the States, and sort of that conversation at one point saying, I'm going to be a poet. Was the family near and far supportive of that?
Well, so in my case, the story is a little complicated because after discovering poetry, I shortly thereafter discovered drugs and alcohol. And so I wasn't talking to my family. I wasn't asking their input very often during those years. I've been sober for 12 years. I'm a happy guy or whatever in recovery, but thank you. But yeah, so that wasn't really part of the calculus for me.
Yeah. And so as we sort of flash forward a little bit, I know there's students in the audience as well. So you're thinking about your career, and I know from talking with you and also just reading up on you, I mean, you've had jobs doing everything.
Yeah. I mean, so again, like I thought that I would just work whatever and be a poet, you know, on the side, you know, like, and so I've driven forklifts for Subaru third shift. I've been a sushi chef. I've, you know, waited tables. I've worked every sort of service and retail job you can. I mean, I used to get fired a lot for the obvious reasons, for pretty predictably, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I've had almost every sort of minimum wage, menial labor job that you can imagine. But I never called myself anything but a poet that whole time.
Yeah, so I think the reason I ask is because I'm so interested in folks coming from all of these different experiences, and one of the many things that just really, really blows my mind about you as a writer is how prolific you are. It seems like you are always creating, and as we are going to be talking about, as you just read from a novel, you went from writing poems to publishing books of poems and editing to writing a novel. How did you keep working when you were doing all of these other jobs and also teaching elementary school? What drove you to keep doing it?
That's a really generous question too. These are great. Thank you. It's usually so much, you know, like, why is this comma here? Or, you know, like,
We can do that too.
no, sure. No, this is fun. I like zooming out. I mean, I'm an addict, you know, and I get really high off having written. You know what I mean? Like those of you, how many people in the audience are writers? Yeah. And so like, you know the feeling of, you know, you just write 1,000 words and then you're floating. You know what I mean? Like if I write 1,000 words or if I write a draft of a poem, like I can, you know, get a flat tire and get a nasty email and, you know, and you know, get into a quibble with my spouse, and you still can't tell me shit. You know what I mean? Like I'm still like floating an inch off the ground, you know, like it is literally narcotic, right? Like I can get super, super high off having written, right? And to this date, it's one of the cleanest, least harmful highs that I know, right? I mean, I've made myself sick off any narcotic you can name, and plenty of non-narcotic highs too. But the fact, if playing Call of Duty made me feel the way that writing did, all I'd be doing is talking about Call of Duty. You know what I mean? Like I'm serious. Like I read you guys that poem, right, by Enheduanna, and you felt that, right? And that's summonable. You can just do that whenever you want. You can just recite a poem. You can just read a poem, put it in the air, and feel really good. You know, like that's an option. I don't know. It feels very rational to me that if feeling good is an option, I should just be pressing that button as often as possible, you know?
Yeah. Just pause real quick. If you guys have questions written on note cards, why don't we pass them to the end of the rows, and folks are going to come collect them. So now would be a good time to pass them down to the end of the rows. Thanks, Kaveh. What a great answer. And that sort of leads me to another thought that I've been thinking about, which is in reading your poetry, and you were talking about prayer, and you were talking about language, and I'm someone who, the more I hear sound, the more I dive in. Yeah. And I'm curious, obviously poetry and writing were important to you as you were sort of coming up and forming an understanding of what was possible in that Kaveh book. Were there other art forms, music, obviously even prayer, that you found kind of inspirational as it relates to art? And also, what do you think poetry or prose does that these other art forms can't do, or vice versa?
That's such a big question, or two big questions. Yeah, I'm obsessed with. I mean, I'm obsessed with just rubbing art in my face as often as possible. Truly, I mean, I'm not one of those teachers who gives students a lot of righty prompts, like, you know, go outside under a full moon and say your mother's maiden name 6 times and then run inside and write a sonnet or whatever, you know? But I do really like thinking about a piece of, you know, go to a museum and find a piece of art that sings to you, right? Figure out what in that piece of art is singing, right? Roland Barthes, talking about photographs, talks about the center of action in the photo, the thing that really excites your eye, or the thing that excites your curiosity. He calls that the punctum, right? And figuring out what in a piece of art sort of serves as that punctum, right? The thing that is, and then saying, how do I do that in a poem, right? How do I do that in a story? How do I do that with language on a page? What would it look like to have something on a page make me feel the way that feels, right? Because, you know, I have 26 crayons, right? that I get to, you know, there are 26 shapes that I get to make and rearrange, right? But I can come pretty close to a lot of, you know, and so, yeah, I also, you know, I have a visual art practice. I am obsessed with visual art, but I'm not good at it. I'm not, you know, like I'm whatever. I wouldn't ever apply that heuristic to anyone saying that they write. But I honestly, Martyr and a thing that I'm working on now are ways of playing in visual art without actually having to accrue the technical faculties to be able to make the thing, right? So there's at the center of Martyr is a piece of performance art, right? That I thought would be an interesting thing to do if I was ever in that position, right? And it's a way to sort of play out that reality, right? And I also talk about other pieces that artist has made that are all pieces that I would be interested in making if I had, again, the technical faculties. So yeah, I'm hugely obsessed with visual art and music, and I'm writing a lot about statuary and pottery and ceramics right now. One of the great sort of epiphanic aesthetic experiences of my life was the first time I ever went to the Rodin Museum in Paris, and just I could have written 1,000 poems just about the way that Rodin sculpts toes, you know, truly. I still might someday. That's a threat. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just, again, this is. And what I love about the novel is that it can be this giant refrigerator door where you can just put magnets of all your favorite things, right? You know, and so the book is filled with, you know, allusions to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I love NBA basketball, right? Like there's a long scene with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and The Simpsons, but also, you know, Bruegel and also Rumi and Hafez, you know, and it's just everything that I love gets to live in this little box.
I think that's one of the many things that I love about the novel. And I will just pause and say, if you haven't read it, go get it. It's very good. I felt in reading it that immediately as a poet, I was like, how did you do it? because my mind just doesn't work that way. The way that it was structured, it felt new and fresh. I will give no spoilers, but many of the things that happened toward the middle, I was not expecting. And it also felt very lived in without giving up the sound of your voice, of many of the things that I love about your poems too. Even in the section that you read, the attention to repetition, to the music, to the sound, to the image, rather than just propulsively moving the plot forward, right? Character is what's driving you. So one question that I have, especially for folks who are thinking about moving across genres, what did you do that gave yourself the permission to go from like being a very successful poet to saying, also, I want to write this novel?
Yeah, I mean, you're saying so many nice things. I can't keep up, but thank you so much for thank you so
You don't
much
have to thank me.
for reading it so generously. It's not a passive thing to read that well, and to read so openly. Yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, I've only ever thought of myself as a poet since I was a teenager. I still really only think of myself as a poet, and so when I realized that I was starting to write characters and paragraphs, I immediately, I've spoken about this elsewhere, but I started putting myself on this narrative diet where I was reading 2 novels a week and watching a movie a day, just utterly kleptomaniacally, you know, like this is how Bergman gets a character through a doorway, and this is how they move from the second act into the third in Pineapple Express, and you know, and this is how, and the miraculous thing in reading that way, because I really, as much as I can allow myself to, like to just read and watch things like a happy barking seal, you know what I mean? Like, which is no activity in my higher brain, and just allow my sort of lizard brain to be delighted and bewildered, you know? I mean, I will watch anything in a movie theater. Andrew from Film Scene knows this, but I think that part of my brain has just never gotten over the spectacle of supernaturally beautiful people 12 feet tall. You know what I mean? I will watch truly anything in a movie theater. But I say this to say, reading this way gave me such a appreciation for the difficulty of, you know, like anyone can say beautiful sounding things in nebulous clouds of gnomic bon mots, right? But the artistry is getting that into a propulsive narrative, right? And so when you read Nabokov or Woolf or Morrison, right? I'm getting goosebumps just saying those names. But like when you read the like true titans, right? What you realize is that they're, you know, if you read The Bluest Eye, right? You could extract any sentence from there and hang it in a museum next to Vermeer and Caravaggio paintings for parallel master studies in composition and light, right? Like the way that those sentences are balanced. I mean, it's like you're reading the Psalms, you know? And so there's that aesthetic, there's that transcendent aesthetic beauty. But also, if you read like the first 2 chapters of The Bluest Eye, you can, in your mind, if I gave you a sheet of paper after you read those first 2 chapters, you could draw with perfect fidelity a floor plan of Piccolo Breedlove's house. You know what I mean? Like that architectonic structure, right? The ability to get that in while you're also doing the other thing, that is genius, you know? And so trying to figure out how artists did that, because you don't have to worry about that in poetry. You just have to sound, you know what I mean? Like there's you don't have to explain how people got the money to buy a plane ticket, right? Or how, you know, how they got at the table where they're having the provocative, you know, whatever conversation, right? But in a story you do, right? And so I just ravenously sort of foie gras ducked narrative into myself, you know what I mean? And then sort of just, yeah, I don't know. I hate that foie gras narrative metaphor. Sorry for that. But yeah,
that's great. I think, do we have the questions? Cool. So as these are coming up, I just had one more follow-up.
Yeah.
So coming again from poetry with the novel, I know you're also working on a lot of really great projects now, maybe we'll get to. But what do you feel like language can do as it relates to, like, you know, you read a poem that you were talking about sitting in the world and how it can move people. Do you feel the power of language can do something that people, by and large, don't recognize?
That qualification that people don't recognize is interesting.
I guess what I'm thinking is we're also living in a time where words seem to both matter a lot and also sometimes not matter.
Right, for sure. I mean, we're living in a time where the great weapon used to stifle critical thinking is a raw overwhelm of meaningless language shot at us from a fire hose, right? You have what is literally called an endless scroll, right? And on that endless scroll is, a football highlight, and then an ad for Charmin, and then autoplay snuff film of state murder of an unarmed civilian, and then, a picture of your friend's baby, and, an inspirational quote, right? And that is denuding the middle thing of the psychospiritual integrity that it would in any other context carry, right? What I do think language can do, especially artful language, is restore some of that integrity. It can slow down our metabolization of language, right? If I'm reading a poem, there's no way to read a poem as quickly as as we're speaking right now, right? There's no way to read it inherently slows you down. And so just in that act of slowing down my metabolization of language, it has a sort of political valence. I will also say that narrative art specifically, if I tell you that, so a lot of my book orbits the Iran Air Flight 655 disaster, which happened in 1988, July 3rd, 1988. A civilian Iranian passenger aircraft, Iran Air Flight 655, was shot out of the sky by the USS Vincennes, killing all 290 people on board, including 66 children, right? I say that to you, you sort of furrow your brow, you say, that's unpleasant, right? That's awful. And then 20 minutes from now, you forget about it, right? I mean, it was soon supplanted in the American consciousness by the Lockerbie incident. Even those of you who lived through it probably aren't thinking about it every day, but that's 290 people, right? Like my brain can't I don't have the ability to somatically distinguish between 290 and 283 and 297. These are, I know that 290 is a middle large number. It's more than 2, it's smaller than 100,000, right? But my ability to somatically apprehend that loss stops there, right? If I tell you 290 people were killed by the USS Vincennes on July 3rd, 1988, right? It's an unpleasant fact. You sort of nod and acquiesce to its being the unpleasant but necessary cost in living in a military superpower, right? If I tell you that my grandmother was one of the people on that flight, you see how the air just shifted, right? That's what narrative does, right? All I did there was add narrative to that number, right? I put narrative on that number, individuated a single value within that number, and now the entirety of that 290 has texture, right? When you hear 65,000 civilians have been murdered thus far in Gaza, right? Incomprehensibly large number, right? When you hear the perspective of an individual child, a parent mourning their child, right? When you consider that every one of those children was as loved as you loved the child in your life, right? Was as precious and irreplaceable and unprecedented as the child in your life, right? Suddenly that narrative gives texture to that whole value, right? That is, I think, for me, a really, really significant function of narrative art.
Did it feel different writing the book, mapping narrative out in a way that maybe perhaps in a poem you weren't as connected to the idea of narrative?
Yeah, I'm not a particularly narrative poet. Plenty of people are. So yeah, it felt completely different. I mean, I never had to get anyone through a doorway. I never had to explain how someone could take off work for a weekend to go to New York City. You know what I mean? Like, I never had to do any of that work.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, does it feel like as an artist you were able to do something different? Not just
for sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, that again. I mean, there are different sort of. I think that poetry can operate on the political valence about which I speak. Carolyn Forche and her Poetry of Witness project and anthologies are testimony to this, people like Phyllis Wheatley writing within the bondage of slavery, affirming the, indelible autonomy of the human mind, right? Or Anna Akhmatova, writing her poems, memorizing them, and then burning them. Or people like Lorca, or, people like Nazim Hikmet, who wrote most of his poems while imprisoned, right? People like Etheridge Knight, who wrote lots of his poetry while imprisoned, right? Affirm for us the sanctuary of the mind, right? Affirm for us that, poetry is among the most democratic art forms because all one needs is a working brain. One doesn't even need paper, right? And so I think that poetry functions in this way, but what interested me about the sort of like political project of writing a novel was the thing about which I'm speaking, the way that the addition of narrative to casualty data can turn abstraction into the individual somatic obliteration of personally experienced grief.
It's very well said. Not to shift gears drastically.
Sure, no, yeah.
But we have a couple questions. Is it cool if we go through these?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for caring enough to write a thing and send it up my way. I appreciate it.
So here's the first question. Writing, this person asks, seems like such a calling and a high to you. What do you say to your UI undergrads who may feel stilted or that their writing isn't there? Do you teach process, just let it move you? How do you approach that? Asking from the lens of a UI rhetoric instructor.
Thank you for teaching RetComp, UI rhetoric instructor. I appreciate you. And they're lucky to have someone like you. Your students are lucky to have someone like you who gives a shit about something like that. It comes across in your asking that question. It's an interesting moment. I think that I'm not gonna like go red in the face, sort of like perseverating over AI or whatever, but it is an interesting moment where one must sort of surrender to the uncontrollability of student lives, right? The fact that while they're in your class, they're in 4 or 5 other classes and also buying toilet paper and doing drugs and falling in love and out of love for the first time in their life, buying their own toilet paper. And so often, their inability to access transcendence within your class is not a function of your pedagogy. It is in fact a function of the fact that, their girlfriend just broke up with them, or they're, really excited about their new Call of Duty gun or whatever. I don't know how, but, and I think that one can really drive themselves into madness as an instructor, trying to be like, why is this not connecting with this individual student when it has nothing to do with you and your pedagogy, right? But I will say that the best pedagogy that I know is demonstrable enthusiasm for the material that you're teaching. And so if you fill the course with stuff that you love, to the extent that you're able, or if you can access an angle of approach into material that you're forced to teach, if you can access an angle of approach into it that touches on elements that you really, really love and feel passionately about, nothing is going to be more effective than that. Showing that earnest, unchecked, bewildered awe at the capacity for making something is not just possible but enviable, is the sort of praxis upon which I've built my entire educational hullabaloo. Yeah. Thank you, but thank you for caring. Thank you for asking.
The next question, it's also just really wonderful, Kaveh, to get the chance to sit and chat with you, and also to see your energy. And I think this question ties into that a little bit. It says, Martyr could have been a much, much sadder and cynical book, but it wasn't. Why was the book so happy?
Oh, that's such a good question. Thank you for that. That's really affirming. I appreciate whoever wrote that in. That's really, really wonderful. One of the things that language is really, really bad at, just not well suited for, is expressing the concurrent of thought. Right now in this moment, I'm a little anxious because I'm talking into a microphone in front of however many people. I'm feeling very grateful to have the opportunity to do this. I'm grateful to get to know my friend Danny a little bit better in this context, and to be able to have this conversation with him and spend time with him. I'm aware that my spouse is over there, and I really like them, and I can look over and be like, and just sort of feel bolstered by their presence. I'm also aware that at some point in the next hour, I'm going to need to pee. I'm also aware that I worked out right before I came here, and I was in South Carolina this morning. And so I'm a little tired, right? And so, I'm also aware that there is a genocide happening right now, the second on the planet Earth, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't be here talking about books. I believe in a future that has no genocide and still has books, right? But all of these thoughts are happening concurrently, right? There's no sequence to them. But all language can do is impose cardinality upon them, right? Is impose order, right? When I put them in sequence, right? Every time I'm saying one of those things, I'm not saying the other things, right? And that is not consistent with consciousness. My experience of consciousness has an element of at-onceness. It is all of those things at once, right? So the grief that I have known in this life has been made wise by having known profound joy. The joy that I have known in this life has been made complex by having known profound grief, right? And that is true at every turn, in every moment of my life. And I want to write in a way that feels consistent with that. I think that the pathologization of cognitive dissonance in the 20th century has led to a lot of inorganic performances of certainty in the 21st. It's become sort of the coin of the realm on social media especially, right? I believe in this one morally hygienic, ethically infantilized thought, and that moral obviousness is so corrosive to the development of a critically thinking mind, right? And I want to make art that exists in all extremities at once, and that lives in the at-onceness that feels consistent with contemporary consciousness.
Yeah, it sort of ties into a little bit of this next question, which is, so how do you balance that empathy in relation to the world with your writing career, your hobbies, your career here at the University of Iowa? I guess in other words, how do you let yourself still create in a space where all the other things going on across the world, large and small, can put many of us in a position where we feel, if not catatonic, what is it all for?
Yeah. Well, shitty cynicism is not going to get anyone free. Despair is a luxury, right? There are people right now, this second, desperately trying to survive who don't have the luxury of being like, well, fuck it, And so me, I'm a tenured, you can Google my salary, right? I'm comfortable, right? And so me saying, everything's fucked, why do anything is absurd, right? It is the height of hubris to adopt that position, right? It's not for me to say whether every action I take is the morally correct one. In Kabbalistic Judaism, there's a beautiful idea about how at any given moment there are 32 saints walking the planet Earth, and 31 of them have a direct line of contact to God at any given moment, right? And so, at any crossroads, God says go left, and they go left, right? And so they're constantly walking in a state of perfection, right? Enlightened perfection, because they have this channel. And there's one saint on the earth at any given moment who doesn't have that connection, but who still moves correctly at any given moment, right? Who still chooses the right path and still chooses the morally correct action at every turn. And I think that that's such a beautiful horizon towards which one might aspire, right? The idea that, I might today move through the world, harming it a little less than I did yesterday, right? And getting a little bit closer to, and like any horizon, you'll never actually get there, right? But it is the marching that sort of keeps you good, right? It is the movement towards that horizon. So yeah, I don't know. I also understand my role, the role of my art as a very humble one, right? Doing that anthology that I did across 43 centuries of people who are all asking these same questions, right? How, despite our overwhelming sameness as a species, do we keep enacting these atrocities upon each other? How, given the fact that everyone that has ever existed has died, do we ever talk about anything else, right? Across every culture, across every religious, aesthetic, spiritual tradition, people are asking these same questions, right? And trying to intervene against them. Enheduanna also says, in your thunder, nothing green could live, right? Addressing Ainana, right? Like, she's talking about man's corrosive impact on the earth, right? What could be more germane, right, in 2025, right? And so given that all of these people cross-culturally have been asking these same questions, if Enheduanna couldn't figure it out, and Mahadavyaka and Patakara and Rumi and Dante and Dickinson and Wheatley couldn't figure this thing out, then Kaveh Akbar in Iowa City is not going to be the one to finally crack the code, and so it really vents a lot of that sense of, my work has to fix everything, right? I mean, the English language has aided and abetted the building and deployment of nuclear weapons, chattel slavery, indigenous genocide, carrying us to the precipice of irreversible ecological collapse, right? All of that aided by the English language. And that's still the language that I use to tell my nieces that I love them, right? It's still the language that I use to write my spouse love poems, right? What does one do in that position? Well, one moves very humbly, right? And one takes their materials seriously.
What an amazing answer. It also brings us back to where we started with this idea of, we've got letters that we can put next to each other to make words. Yeah. And you're talking, your crayon box. You're also talking about, being here in Iowa City. And I'm curious, having moved to Iowa City somewhat recently, what do you think it is about Iowa City that makes a place that is so special for writers?
Yeah, I think that because I've moved here 3 years ago, and so I think because I'm still relatively new to it, I'm still a little bit in awe of it, that you're all just walking around like this is normal. Like I live literally, like, if you walk across the street from my house, you're at Melissa Phoebos and Danica Kelly's house, right? Like, those are two of the greatest practitioners in our craft today, right? And then down the street, Luis Munoz and Garth Greenwell live, right? And you're here, and Carmen Maria Machado's here, and Jamel Brinkley and Sam Chen. This is not normal. You know what I mean? Like, this is not how it is anywhere else in the world, right? There are cities with as many great writers, but they're way bigger. Like, if you go to New York, there are great writers, but they're really spread, right? Like, you literally can't cross the street from my house without running into a transcendent writer, a globally renowned writer, like, that's insane. The density of literary talent in Iowa City is not met by any other city in the world, right? The density of literary talent. There's an incredible reading or literary event at least once a night. Often I have to make decisions about whose reading I'm going to go to between the NWP and the Spanish MFA and the International Writers Program and the workshop and the undergraduate writers program and the Center for the Book. And it's insane. It is insane that you have, there are like 37 undergraduate literary journals to be involved with, right? There's the Iowa Review, right? The idea that this is all present in one smallish, mid-sized American city is I think that you guys don't understand. Those of you who have been here for a minute don't quite understand how weird that is from the outside, right? So yeah, I don't know. This is Narnia for someone like me who gets as high as I do off writing, right? Like, this is just like, a field full of needles is a terrible metaphor, but this is just like a happy version of that, I guess.
Yeah. No, you said at the beginning, right? All these people came out tonight.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
To think critically about literature and hear from a practitioner who is operating at the highest level, because they care about words too. So we're up against time here. So I want to end with kind of one question for you, which is, again, poetry, editing work, writing a novel. Are you comfortable telling us what you're working on now?
Yeah. I'm always writing. I never stopped writing poems, and so I write a lot. I publish very little. So while I was working on Martyr, that felt very sort of new and novel and difficult in some way. Whenever I call writing difficult. I'm sort of doing it tongue in cheek. Like, again, I've driven forklifts. I've taught middle school. Like, writing isn't difficult, right? But like, difficult in that it is not, what is instinctive for me in terms of how I typically arrange language on a page. And so to vent some of that and get back into the pure play fun of language, I wrote all of these love poems for my spouse, just like I would write a love poem for my spouse and sort of like, sneak it on the table and they would read it and sort of give me my attaboy and then be like, and now go walk the dogs or whatever. And so I have a bunch of those, and I think that my next poetry book will probably just be a book of very earnest, artless, unironic love poems. That might be the title. I think that you could do worse for a title than that. I'm also working on a new fiction thing. I don't want to say much more about that one. And I'm also, I think I'm allowed to say, don't like go home and tweet this out yet because I might get in trouble, but keep your eyes peeled for Martyr movie.
Hey!
So, and that has taken up a lot of time as well.
Amazing.
And so, please don't, I'm like 98% sure I'm allowed to say that, but please don't get me sued.
It's also beautiful to hear after everything you've so wonderfully said tonight, to know that you're coming back to love.
Oh, yeah. No, it's I really, truly, I recommend that everyone in the audience marry Paige Lewis if you have the opportunity. It's really working out great for me.
Kaveh, this has been so wonderful. Thank you for what you do for our community. Thank you for what you do for the world.
Yeah,
of
thank you so
artists and
much,
writers.
Danny, for being so generous.
Thank you all for being here. Good night, everybody.